Number 1, Peter Yarrow. To truly understand the seismic magnitude of this loss, we cannot simply look at a calendar and say that a musician died in 2025. We have to understand that we have lost a living library of American history. We have lost a man who didn't just witness the cultural revolution of the 20th century, he was one of the primary architects who built it. Peter Yarrow was the moral conscience of a generation that believed, with absolute sincerity, that a song could stop a war. In the early 1960s, the world was black and white. It was rigid. It was conservative. And then, from the smoky, brick-walled coffee houses of Greenwich Village in New York City, a sound emerged that would color the world forever. Peter Yarrow, along with Noel, Paul, Stookie and Mary Travers, formed Peter, Paul and Mary. They were not just a band, they were a carefully constructed phenomenon. With Peter's gentle, scholarly demeanor, Paul's humor, and Mary's striking blonde intensity, they became the bridge that carried folk music from the fringes of society into the living rooms of mainstream America. They took the raw, dangerous energy of Bob Dylan and polished it until it sparkled, allowing the message of protest to slip past the censors and into the hearts of the suburbs. But Peter Yarrow's legacy is forever tied to a specific, mythical creature. He co-wrote Puff, the Magic Dragon, a song that has arguably sparked more debate, theory, and analysis than any other track in folk history. On the surface, it is a lullaby of heartbreaking beauty. It tells the story of an ageless dragon and a little boy named Jackie Paper. It is a story about the inevitable tragedy of time. Jackie grows up, he loses interest in his imaginary friend, and the dragon is left alone in his cave, weeping scales of sorrow. It is a masterclass in the psychology of childhood loss. It explores the painful realization that innocence is not a permanent state, it is a fleeting season that must eventually die to make room for adulthood. However, in the paranoid, drug-fueled atmosphere of the late 1960s, the culture refused to accept it as a simple fairy tale. A myth exploded that the song was a coded instruction manual for smoking marijuana. Puff was the smoke, dragon was the drag. Peter Yarrow spent over 50 years fighting this interpretation. He would stand on stages around the world, look the audience in the eye, and plead with them to understand the purity of his art. He viewed the drug interpretation as a cynical attack on the innocence of imagination. He insisted that the song was about the cruelty of growing up, which is a far more painful reality than any drug trip. Here is a psychological question for you, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. Why does society always try to corrupt innocent things? Why couldn't we accept that a song about a dragon was just a song about a dragon? I want to read your theories on the corruption of innocence in the comments below. Do you believe the drug theory, or do you believe Peter? If Peter Yarrow had only written Puff, he would still be a legend. But his true legacy wasn't found in the Billboard charts, it was found on the front lines of the most dangerous and important social movements in American history. Peter Yarrow did not view music as a commercial product to be sold, he viewed it as a tool for justice. He believed that the vibrations of a harmony could actually dismantle the walls of segregation. In August 1963, this belief was put to the ultimate test. Peter Yarrow stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The air was thick with the humid heat of summer and the electric tension of history in the making. Looking out, he saw a sea of 250,000 faces, black and white, young and old, gathered for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This was the defining moment of the civil rights movement. And who was holding the microphone? Peter Yarrow. Along with his bandmates, he sang, "If I Had a Hammer," and "Blowin' in the Wind." These weren't just songs to entertain the crowd while they waited for the speakers. These were anthems of survival. Peter performed just minutes before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stepped up to the podium to deliver his "I Have a Dream" speech. Think about the gravity of that. Peter Yarrow's voice is woven into the DNA of that speech. He was the warm-up act for the moral redemption of America. He didn't just watch history, he provided the soundtrack for it. But his activism didn't stop when the cameras turned off. In the late 60s, as the Vietnam War tore the country apart, Peter Yarrow was there again. He faced tear gas. He faced arrests. He faced death threats from people who called him a traitor. He organized festivals for peace, using his fame as a shield to protect the voiceless. He understood a fundamental truth about celebrity that most modern stars have forgotten: fame is a resource. It is a currency. And Peter Yarrow spent every penny of his currency on trying to make the world softer, fairer, and more just. He famously discovered a young, unknown songwriter named John Denver. Peter heard a rough demo of a song called "Leaving on a Jet Plane." Instead of stealing it or burying it, Peter championed it. He recorded it with Peter, Paul, and Mary, and it became their only #1 hit. He gave John Denver his career. This was the measure of the man. He was generous with his spotlight. He wasn't competing with other artists, he was building a community. This triggers a massive debate about the role of artists in society today. Look at the modern music industry. It is obsessed with streams, likes, and brand deals. Do you think we will ever see another artist like Peter Yarrow who is willing to risk his entire career for a political cause? Or has corporate greed killed the protest singer? Hit the like button if you missed the days when music stood for something real. As the decades rolled on, the world changed. The idealism of the 60s gave way to the cynicism of the 70s and the greed of the 80s. But Peter Yarrow remained a steadfast lighthouse in the storm. He never sold out. He never changed his tune to fit the trends. He kept his acoustic guitar, he kept his harmonies, and he kept his faith in humanity. The deepest blow came in 2009, with the death of Mary Travers. For Peter, this was like losing a limb. The trio was a single organism, and without Mary's powerful voice in the center, the silence was deafening. But Peter didn't retire. He transformed. In his later years, he founded Operation Respect, a non-profit organization dedicated to fighting bullying in schools. He launched the "Don't Laugh at Me" campaign, traveling to schools across the country to teach children about empathy. Imagine this. A man who had played for presidents and marched with King was now sitting on the floor of gymnasiums, singing to second graders, teaching them not to be cruel to one another. He understood that hatred is learned behavior, and if you can catch a child early enough, you can teach them love instead. He dedicated the entire final chapter of his life to the idea that kindness is a revolutionary act. In 2025, when the news broke that Peter Yarrow had finally passed away, the reaction was not the hysterical grief of a pop star's death. It was a profound, heavy melancholy. It was the feeling of a sun setting on a long, beautiful day. We realize that the last link to that golden era is gone. The voices that sang for freedom are going quiet, one by one. Peter Yarrow leaves behind a world that is arguably more divided than the one he tried to fix. And that is the tragedy. But he also leaves behind the blueprint. He showed us that you don't need to be loud to be heard. He showed us that a gentle spirit can break down a stone wall. He proved that Puff the Magic Dragon wasn't just a fairy tale, it was a prophecy. We are all Jackie Paper. We have all grown up. The magic of the 60s has faded into the mist. And now, the dragon has flown away for the last time. We are left with the music, but we have lost the conscience. Peter Yarrow's life was a testament to the idea that if you sing loud enough, and true enough, and with enough love in your heart, you really can change the world. He did it once. It is up to us to see if we can do it again. Peter Yarrow has laid down his guitar. But the list of legends we lost in 2025 is just beginning. Our next loss comes from a very different world, the sweaty, gritty, high-octane world of Southern soul. He was a man who survived addiction, survived hatred, and survived the most toxic partnership in music history to become a legend. Up next, we have the story of Sam Dave. Sam Moore was one half of the greatest soul duo in history. If you ever danced to Soul Man, you owe him a debt of gratitude. This is a story of rhythm, blues, and survival. Subscribe now, because the soul train is leaving the station. Number 2, Sam Moore. To understand the sheer, earth-shaking magnitude of this loss, you have to understand the chemistry of sweat. In the mid-1960s, American music was divided. In Detroit, there was Motown, polished, choreographed, elegant, and safe. It was the sound of young America, designed to cross over to white audiences with polite melodies and matching tuxedos. But down in Memphis, Tennessee, in a converted movie theater known as Stax Records, something much dirtier, much rawer, and much more dangerous was happening. They called it soul. And standing at the absolute summit of that gritty mountain were two men who didn't just sing, they exploded. They were Sam Dave. Sam Moore was the Sam in the equation, and he was the engine of the operation. He possessed a tenor voice that could strip paint off the walls. He didn't just hit notes, he attacked them. He grew up in the church, raised on the ecstatic frenzy of gospel music, where the goal wasn't to sound pretty, it was to catch the Holy Ghost. Sam took that religious fervor and dragged it into the secular world of nightclubs and jukeboxes. When he screamed, you felt it in your chest. It was a physical assault of emotion. Alongside his partner Dave Prater, Sam Moore created a sound that was nicknamed Double Dynamite. It was an apt description. Their live shows were legendary feats of endurance. They would hit the stage running, drenched in perspiration before the first chorus ended, whipping the crowd into a frenzy that bordered on a riot. Songs like Hold On, I'm Comin' and I Thank You were driven by a relentless, driving beat and the sharp, stabbing horns of the Memphis Horns. But the crown jewel was Soul Man. Released in 1967, during the long hot summer of racial unrest, Soul Man became an anthem of black pride and resilience. When Sam Moore shouted the now immortal ad-lib, "Play it, Steve," to guitarist Steve Cropper, he wasn't just talking to a bandmate, he was inviting the entire world to join the party. The magic of Sam Moore was his ability to use his voice as a percussion instrument. He popularized the call and response style that defined the genre. He would shout, Dave would answer, and the tension would build until the song climaxed in a euphoric release. It was arguably the most masculine, aggressive, and powerful sound ever captured on vinyl. It was the antithesis of the Beatles. It was the sound of grown men pouring their pain and their joy onto a microphone track. Here is a question for the true audiophiles watching this. There has always been a war between the two capitals of black music in the 60s. Do you prefer the polished, perfect, radio-friendly sound of Motown, the Temptations, the Supremes, or do you prefer the gritty, raw, unpolished sound of Stax, Otis Redding, Sam Dave? I want to see a battle of the labels in the comments section. Type hashtag Team Motown or hashtag Team Stax. Which sound hits your soul harder? But behind the matching suits, the synchronized dance steps, and the infectious smiles lay a dark, twisted secret that makes their success even more miraculous. It is one of the greatest paradoxes in music history. Sam Moore and Dave Prater, the duo that sounded like they shared a single heartbeat, absolutely hated each other. This wasn't just a professional rivalry or a case of mild annoyance. It was a deep, visceral, and toxic disdain that lasted for decades. For 13 long years, during the height of their fame, the two men barely spoke a word to each other off stage. They traveled in separate cars. They stayed on different floors of the hotel. They had separate dressing rooms. They would stand in the wings of the stage, glaring at one another, refusing to acknowledge the other's existence. But then, the announcer would say their names, the lights would hit them, and something supernatural would happen. They would run onto the stage, grab the microphones, and instantly lock into perfect harmony. The hatred seemed to vanish, replaced by an electric, undeniable connection. Psychologists might argue that the tension between them was actually the secret ingredient. They were competing with each other in real time, every single night. Sam was trying to outsing Dave, and Dave was trying to outshout Sam. The result was a frantic, nervous energy that the audience mistook for joy, but was actually a musical duel to the death. Sam Moore was the survivor of this toxic marriage. The pressure of the fame, the grueling touring schedule of the Chitlin circuit, and the internal warfare led Sam down a dark path. He fell into a brutal addiction to heroin in the 1970s. He became a functioning addict, performing for thousands while slowly killing himself in the shadows. He watched his career disintegrate as the soul era gave way to disco. And then, the ultimate tragedy struck. His partner, Dave Prater, whom he had spent a lifetime fighting with, died in a car crash in 1988. They never truly reconciled. Sam was left alone. He was the surviving half of a whole. He had to face the guilt, the addiction, and the silence. But unlike so many of his peers who succumbed to the lifestyle, Sam Moore chose to fight. He cleaned up. He got sober. He became an advocate for artists' rights, fighting for royalties that had been stolen from R&B singers for decades. He rebuilt his life from the ashes of his addiction and the ruins of his partnership. This brings up a fascinating psychological question about creativity: can true greatness only come from conflict? If Sam and Dave had been best friends who loved each other, would the music have been as intense? Or was the hatred the fuel that made the fire burn so bright? Hit the like button if you think that friction creates fire, and that the best art often comes from the worst relationships. In the later years of his life, Sam Moore transcended the genre of soul and became a living monument to American music. He was the last man standing from the golden era of Stax Records. Otis Redding was gone. Wilson Pickett was gone. Isaac Hayes was gone. Dave was gone. Sam was the only one left to tell the stories. He didn't waste his second chance. In the 2000s, he experienced a massive career resurgence. He recorded a Grammy-nominated album titled Overnight Sensation, collaborating with rock giants like Bruce Springsteen, Jon Bon Jovi, and Sting. It was a validation of his talent. It proved that he wasn't just Dave's partner, he was a vocal titan in his own right. Bruce Springsteen famously called him the greatest living soul singer, a title Sam wore with humble pride. Sam Moore spent his final years touring, not because he needed the money, but because the stage was the only place he ever truly felt alive. He defied age. Even in his 80s, he could still hit the notes. He could still work the crowd. He could still wipe the sweat from his brow and make you believe in the power of soul. But in January 2025, the music finally stopped. When the news broke that Sam Moore had passed away at the age of 89, it felt like the closing of a heavy book. It wasn't just the death of a man, it was the death of a sound. That specific type of raw, unpolished, sweaty testimony, the sound of the church meeting the street corner, has gone silent. We have the records, of course. We can still listen to Soul Man. But we will never again see that kind of lightning in a bottle. We will never again see a man stand on a stage and pour his entire life force into a 3-minute song. Sam Moore's death is the final severance from a time when music was physical, when it was dangerous, and when it was real. He taught us that you don't have to like the person standing next to you to make magic with them, you just have to hit the right note. He taught us that you can survive addiction, you can survive hatred, and you can survive grief, as long as you keep singing. The soul man has finally gone home. The microphone is off. The stage is dark. And somewhere, perhaps, the double dynamite is finally at peace. Sam Moore has left the building. But our next loss hits a very different nerve. We are moving from the sweaty stages of the soul circuit to the comfortable, dramatic living rooms of daytime television. She was a soap opera legend who spent 45 years in our homes, becoming a surrogate family member to millions. Up next, we have Leslie Charleson. To millions of fans, she wasn't just an actress, she was Dr. Monica Quartermaine. When the star of General Hospital passed away, it left a void in daytime TV that can never be filled. The details of her final years and her dedication to her craft are heartbreakingly beautiful. Subscribe now, because number 3 is a tribute to the Queen of Port Charles. Number 3, Leslie Charleson. To truly understand why this loss feels so uniquely devastating, why it feels less like a celebrity death and more like a death in the family, we have to deconstruct the psychology of daytime television. There is no other medium in the history of entertainment that creates a bond quite like the soap opera. If you watch a movie, you spend 2 hours with a character. If you watch a prestigious drama like Breaking Bad, you might spend 5 years with them. But in the world of daytime soaps, the relationship is measured in decades. These characters do not just visit your screen, they inhabit your home. They are there when you come home from school as a child. They are there when you are homesick with the flu. They are there when you hold your firstborn child, and they are there when you retire. They are the invisible roommates of American life. For 47 years, nearly half a century, Leslie Charleson was the heartbeat of General Hospital. In February 2025, when the lights in the fictional city of Port Charles dimmed for the final time, it sent a shockwave of genuine grief through millions of households. Leslie Charleson was not just an actress playing a role, she was Dr. Monica Quartermaine. She was the anchor. She was the constant variable in a world of chaos. She joined the cast in August 1977. To put that in perspective, Jimmy Carter was in the White House. Star Wars had just hit theaters. Disco was still dominating the radio. The world was a completely different place, yet Leslie Charleson remained. She stayed through the Reagan era, the end of the Cold War, the rise of the Internet, and the dawn of the streaming age. She was a witness to history, viewing the changing world through the lens of a hospital drama. When she first arrived, she was the new face, a replacement for a previous actress. In the soap world, recasts are usually rejected by fans. But Leslie didn't just take the role, she conquered it. She brought a steeliness, an intelligence, and a vulnerability to Monica that turned a supporting character into a matriarch. She wasn't just a love interest, she was a brilliant cardiologist. At a time when women on TV were often relegated to victimhood or decoration, Monica Quartermaine was performing heart surgery in the morning and fighting for her family in the afternoon. She was a feminist icon in a lab coat, even if the culture wasn't ready to call her that yet. Here is a question for the devoted daytime viewers, the ones who have been watching since the VCR era. Do you think modern television shows, with their 8-episode seasons and cancellations after 2 years, could ever create a character that lasts for 50 years? Or is the era of the lifer, the actor who dedicates their entire life to one role, officially over? I want to know if you think streaming has killed this kind of longevity. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But Leslie Charleson's legacy isn't just about showing up, it's about how she showed up. The character of Monica Quartermaine was a masterclass in complexity. She wasn't a saint. She was messy. She had affairs. She kept secrets. She was often selfish. But that is exactly why the audience loved her. She felt human. Her defining relationship was with the Quartermaine family, a wealthy, dysfunctionally hilarious clan that became the backbone of the show. Her marriage to Dr. Alan Quartermaine was a war zone. They fought, they cheated on each other, they plotted against each other, and yet, they loved each other with a ferocity that was undeniable. When actor Stuart Damon, who played Alan, passed away years prior, viewers watched Leslie Charleson grieve on screen. The lines between acting and reality blurred. We weren't just watching a character lose her husband, we were watching a woman lose her partner of 30 years. And then, there was the feud. You cannot talk about Leslie Charleson without talking about Jane Elliott, the actress who played her sister-in-law, Tracy Quartermaine. For decades, these two titans of acting traded barbs, insults, and schemes. They were the Bette Davis and Joan Crawford of daytime TV. They screamed, they threw vases, and they fought for control of the family fortune. But beneath the venom, Leslie infused the relationship with a twisted sisterhood. You could mess with Monica, but if an outsider messed with the Quartermaines, Monica and Tracy would team up and destroy them. It was a dynamic that required incredible acting chemistry, and Leslie Charleson had it in spades. But perhaps her most enduring contribution to pop culture is a single line of dialogue. It is a line that has been memed, quoted, and shouted by fans for generations. During the many times her husband or the other Quartermaines tried to kick her out of the family mansion, Monica would stand tall, fix them with an icy stare, and declare, "It's my house, Alan. You gave it to me." It became a rallying cry. It represented her survival. No matter how many times she was beaten down, cheated on, or humiliated, she held on to that house. It was her fortress. In the end, as the rest of the family died off one by one, Alan, Edward, Lila, Monica remained the lady of the manor. She was the last soldier standing in that big, empty set. This triggers a deep sense of nostalgia for anyone who grew up with the show. Can you hear her voice saying that line right now? If you remember the Quartermain Wars of the 90s, specifically the Thanksgiving pizza tradition, hit the like button. Let's see how many longtime fans are watching this tribute. In her later years, Leslie Charleson faced the brutal reality of aging in high definition. For an actress, growing old on camera is an act of bravery. She didn't hide. She allowed the audience to see her change. She dealt with health issues that forced her to take leaves of absence, including a fall that injured her leg, but she always fought to come back. She refused to retire. She felt a duty to the character and to the fans to see the story through to the end. When she passed away in February 2025, the reaction from the industry was overwhelming. But it was the reaction from the fans that told the real story. Social media was flooded not with generic RIP messages, but with detailed memories. People shared stories about how they used to watch General Hospital with their grandmothers who had since passed away. They spoke about how Monica Quartermain was the only constant in their lives during divorces, deaths, and upheavals. Leslie Charleson had become a thread in the fabric of their personal histories. Her death signifies the end of an era that can never be replicated. The Quartermain mansion is finally empty. The vibrant, chaotic, loud family dinners are silent. The era of the super soap, where 30 million people would tune in to see a wedding, is long gone. Leslie Charleson was the guardian of that history. She carried the torch for the golden age of television until she physically could not carry it anymore. She proved that you don't need to be a movie star to be a legend. You don't need an Oscar to change lives. You just need to show up, every day, for 47 years, and invite the world into your living room. She was consistent in a world that is anything but. The lady of the manor has finally gone to rest. The house is quiet. But our next loss takes us from the comfort of the hospital to the terrifying, twisted corners of the human mind. Up next, we have the man who made weird mainstream. In January 2025, we lost the architect of our nightmares. David Lynch didn't just make movies, he created puzzles that we are still trying to solve. From the severed ear in Blue Velvet to the Red Room in Twin Peaks, he changed the way we see the world. Subscribe now, because the master of surrealism is next. Number 4, David Lynch. If Leslie Charleson represented the comfort of the familiar, David Lynch represented the terrifying, seductive pull of the unknown. In January 2025, the world of cinema didn't just lose a director, it lost an entire dimension. The man with the shock of white hair, the buttoned-up collar, and the cigarette permanently etched between his fingers took his final bow. To say he was a filmmaker is an understatement. He was an explorer of the human subconscious. He was the man who peeled back the white picket fences of the American dream to reveal the rotting, screaming insects crawling underneath. David Lynch is one of the very few artists in history whose name became an adjective. Lynchian. You can find it in the dictionary. It describes a specific feeling, a blend of the macabre and the mundane, the surreal and the suburban. It is the feeling of walking into a diner that feels slightly wrong, or hearing a pop song that sounds like a funeral dirge. When he passed away, we didn't just lose a man, we lost the ability to describe a certain shade of darkness. His career began not in Hollywood, but in the industrial wasteland of Philadelphia, which inspired his debut feature, Eraserhead. Released in 1977, it was a film that defied logic. It was a black-and-white fever dream about a man with hair that defied gravity, caring for a mutant baby in a radiator-filled apartment. It should have been a forgotten art school project. Instead, it became the midnight movie that defined a generation. It forced audiences to confront their own anxieties about parenthood and existence. It was repulsive, yet you couldn't look away. This was Lynch's magic trick, he made the grotesque beautiful. But his true masterpiece of subversion came in 1986 with Blue Velvet. The opening sequence is the perfect thesis statement for his entire career. We see bright red roses against a blue sky. We see a fireman waving from a truck. We see children crossing the street. It is the perfect, sanitized image of 1950s America. And then, the camera pans down into the perfectly manicured grass, deeper and deeper, until we see beetles fighting and devouring each other in the dirt. And then, a young man finds a severed human ear in a field. That ear was a portal. David Lynch spent his entire life grabbing us by the hand and dragging us through that portal into the dark underbelly of the world. He showed us that evil doesn't just live in haunted houses, it lives in lumber yards, in gas stations, and behind the curtains of the Red Room. Here is a psychological question for the brave viewers watching tonight: why are we so addicted to being disturbed? David Lynch's movies are often terrifying and confusing, yet we watch them obsessively. Do you think we watch weird movies to escape reality, or to see a truer version of it? I want to read your theories on the psychology of horror in the comments below. Why do you watch Lynch? While Blue Velvet made him a critical darling, it was Twin Peaks that made him a cultural phenomenon. In 1990, David Lynch did the unthinkable, he brought the avant-garde to primetime television. Before Twin Peaks, TV was safe. It was procedural. Cops caught robbers, and families solved problems in 30 minutes. Then came the question that changed pop culture forever: who killed Laura Palmer? Lynch turned a murder mystery into a metaphysical exploration of good and evil. He introduced us to the Black Lodge, dancing dwarves, giants, and a damn fine cup of coffee. He proved that audiences weren't stupid. He proved that people were hungry for mystery. Twin Peaks paved the way for the X-Files, Lost, Breaking Bad, and Stranger Things. Every prestige drama you love today owes a debt to David Lynch. But here is what made Lynch truly unique, and perhaps why his death feels so significant in 2025, he refused to explain himself. In an era where every movie comes with a director's commentary, a Wikipedia page, and a 10-minute YouTube video explaining the ending, David Lynch stood firm in his silence. He famously said, "The film is the talking." He believed that once you explain a mystery, you kill it. He respected the audience enough to let them be confused. He wanted you to feel the movie, not just solve it like a math equation. Take Mulholland Drive, often cited as the greatest film of the 21st century. It is a puzzle box with no instructions. Characters change names. The plot loops in on itself. A blue box appears out of nowhere. Lynch never told us what it meant. And because he never told us, we are still talking about it 25 years later. He gave us the gift of infinite interpretation. In a world of instant answers and Google searches, David Lynch was the last guardian of the great unknown. This triggers a massive debate about art versus content. Today, audiences often get angry if a movie doesn't have a clear ending. We want closure. We want to know who the killer is. Do you agree with Lynch that the mystery is the best part, or do you hate it when a movie leaves you hanging? Hit the like button if you prefer an open ending, or comment, "Give me answers," if you want the plot explained. David Lynch was a man of contradictions. On screen, he created nightmares. But in real life, he was a wholesome, cheerful man from Montana who sounded like Jimmy Stewart. He practiced transcendental meditation every single day for 50 years. He preached peace and creativity. He called ideas fish, and he spent his life sitting quietly, waiting to catch the big ones. However, the final chapter of his life was marked by a cruel and tragic irony. For decades, the image of David Lynch was inseparable from the cigarette. Smoke was a texture in his films, and it was a constant companion in his life. He romanticized the ritual of smoking, viewing it as part of the art life. But biology does not care about art. In his final years, Lynch fought a very public battle with emphysema. He became housebound. He could no longer walk across a room without gasping for air. He famously announced, "I enjoyed smoking very much, but there is a price to pay for this enjoyment." It was a heartbreaking admission from a man who had always lived on his own terms. Yet, even as his breath failed him, his creativity did not. He embraced the internet age in a way no one expected. He started a YouTube channel. Every day, he would post a weather report, simply looking out his window in Los Angeles and telling us if it was cloudy or sunny. He would pick a number of the day. It was mundane, it was repetitive, and it was beautiful. It was a lifeline. It was his way of telling us, I am still here. I am still creating. When he passed away in January 2025, the tribute wasn't just a list of his movies. It was a collective realization that the world had just become a lot more normal, and a lot less magical. He proved that you don't have to follow the rules to be a legend. You can make a movie about a man with an elephant's head, or a woman living in a radiator, or a detective talking to a log. If you do it with absolute conviction, the world will not only watch, they will be mesmerized. David Lynch has gone to the Black Lodge in the sky. He leaves behind a puzzle that will never be fully solved. The curtains have closed. The music has stopped. And somewhere, in the ether, the electricity is humming. The director of dreams has yelled, "Cut," for the final time. But our next loss takes us from the surreal world of avant-garde cinema to the regal, disciplined world of the British stage. Up next, we have a dame. Joan Plowright was British acting royalty, the widow of Laurence Olivier, and a powerhouse in her own right. But to a younger generation, she was the beloved nanny who saved 101 Dalmatians. She brought dignity to every role, and her passing marks the end of the golden age of British theatre. Subscribe now, because number 5 is a tribute to true nobility. Number 5, Joan Plowright. To fully grasp the significance of this loss, we must first understand the concept of royalty without a crown. In the United Kingdom, there are the Windsors, who live in Buckingham Palace, and then there is the aristocracy of the theatre. These are the titans who built the modern reputation of British acting, names like Gielgud, Richardson, Redgrave, and Dench. In 2025, with the passing of Dame Joan Plowright at the age of 95, the final pillar of that golden generation has crumbled. We have not just lost an actress, we have lost the last direct link to a time when acting was considered a noble, disciplined trade, closer to a religion than a path to celebrity. Joan Plowright's career began in an era of revolution. In the late 1950s, she was not playing queens or princesses, she was at the forefront of the kitchen sink realism movement at the Royal Court Theatre. She was the voice of the working class, bringing a gritty, raw honesty to the stage in plays like Arnold Weskier's Roots. She was a firebrand. She was a radical. But her life changed forever when she crossed paths with the man who was widely considered the greatest actor on the planet, Laurence Olivier. Their marriage in 1961 created a cultural supernova. They were the power couple before that term even existed. When Olivier became the founding director of the National Theatre, Joan was his leading lady, his confidante, and his equal. But this position came with a heavy, suffocating price. For decades, Joan Plowright had to fight a war on two fronts. She had to perform Shakespeare to critical acclaim while simultaneously fighting to not be swallowed by the massive shadow of her husband. The press often referred to her simply as Lady Olivier, a title that erased her own genius. Imagine the psychological fortitude required to stand on a stage next to Laurence Olivier, knowing the entire audience is comparing you to him. Yet, she never faltered. She carved out her own identity, earning her own title of Dame Commander of the British Empire in 2004. She proved that she was not just a satellite orbiting a star, she was a sun in her own right. She brought a grounded, human warmth to the classics that her husband, with all his technical brilliance, sometimes lacked. Here is a question for the theatre buffs and the students of history: do you think it is harder for an artist to succeed when they are married to a legend? Does the connection open doors, or does the shadow make it impossible to ever be seen for who you truly are? I want to read your thoughts on celebrity power couples in the comments. Did Joan get the respect she deserved during her lifetime? If Joan Plowright's first act was defined by prestige and Shakespeare, her second act was defined by something far more powerful, love. As the 1990s arrived, the theater legend made a surprising pivot. She crossed the Atlantic and began appearing in Hollywood family films. To the critics in London, this might have seemed like a step down. But to a generation of children growing up in America and around the world, it was a revelation. For millions of people watching this video right now, Joan Plowright is not Lady Olivier. She is Nanny. In the 1996 live-action adaptation of 101 Dalmatians, Joan Plowright played the role of Nanny, the warm, loving, protective caregiver who stood as the moral opposite to Glenn Close's terrifying Cruella de Vil. In a movie filled with puppies and chaos, Joan Plowright provided the heart. She radiated a specific kind of safety. When she looked at the camera, she looked like the grandmother everyone wished they had. She brought that same warmth to Dennis the Menace, 1993, as Martha Wilson, the patient wife of the grumpy Mr. Wilson. She played these roles with the same commitment and dignity she brought to Chekhov or Ibsen. She didn't treat family movies as beneath her, she treated them as an opportunity to comfort a new audience. This transition from the high art of the British stage to the pop culture of American cinema is a testament to her versatility. Most actors get trapped in one box. They are either serious actors or movie stars. Joan Plowright destroyed that wall. She proved that you could be a dame of the British Empire and still get covered in molasses by Dennis the Menace, and somehow, keep your dignity intact. Her performance in Enchanted April, 1992, where she played an elderly woman rediscovering joy in Italy, earned her a Golden Globe and an Oscar nomination. It was a late career bloom that reminded Hollywood she was a powerhouse. But for the kids of the 90s, she remains an icon of nostalgia. When we see her face, we smell cookies baking. We feel safe. That is a legacy that Shakespeare cannot buy. This triggers a deep wave of nostalgia. I want you to close your eyes and remember the movies of your childhood. Did you grow up watching her as Nanny or Mrs. Wilson? Hit the like button if she was the on-screen grandmother you always wanted. Let's see how many 90s kids are here to pay their respects. However, the final chapter of Joan Plowright's life was not defined by acting, but by resilience. In the early 2000s, tragedy struck, not in the form of a death, but in the form of darkness. Joan was diagnosed with macular degeneration, a progressive eye condition that slowly stole her vision. For an actor, vision is everything. You need to read scripts. You need to see your scene partner's eyes to react to their emotions. You need to see the edge of the stage so you don't fall. By 2014, Joan Plowright was forced to officially retire from acting because she could no longer see the lights. It was a cruel, ironic fate for a woman who had spent her life observing human nature. But Joan Plowright did not fade away into a quiet, sad retirement. She fought back with humor. In 2018, she appeared in the magnificent documentary Nothing Like a Dame, also known as Tea with the Dames. The film featured Joan sitting around a table with her best friends and fellow legends, Dame Maggie Smith, Dame Judi Dench, and Dame Eileen Atkins. They drank tea, and champagne, gossiped, and talked about death. In that documentary, we saw the real Joan. She was hilarious. She was unsentimental. She spoke openly about her blindness, cracking jokes about how she could no longer see who she was talking to. She refused to be pitied. When asked about her legacy, she simply laughed. She showed the world that aging is not a tragedy, it is just another act in the play. She was the anchor of that group, the wise matriarch who had outlived her husband, outlived her critics, and was now outliving her own eyesight. When Joan Plowright passed away in 2025 at the age of 95, it was the final curtain call for a specific era of elegance. With Maggie Smith passing just a short time before her, the table is now empty. The dames have gone. We have lost the voices that didn't need microphones to be heard in the back row. We have lost the women who valued diction, discipline, and dignity above fame. Joan Plowright survived the pressure of being married to the most famous actor in the world. She survived the loss of her sight. And she survived the fickleness of Hollywood. She leaves behind a legacy of strength, reminding us that true nobility isn't about the title in front of your name, it's about how you carry yourself when the lights go out. The dame has taken her final bow. The stage is dark. But our next loss takes us from the refined air of the British theatre to the smell of hot dogs, beer, and cut grass. Up next, we have the man who made mediocrity famous. Bob Uecker was a terrible baseball player, and he was proud of it. He turned a lifetime of sitting on the bench into a legendary career in broadcasting and comedy. He was Mr. Baseball, the voice of the Brewers, and the star of Major League. Subscribe now, because number 6 is a tribute to the man who made us laugh at failure. Number 6, Bob Uecker. To understand the genius of Bob Uecker, you have to understand the American obsession with success, and then you have to look at the man who became a legend by flipping that obsession completely upside down. In a world dominated by statistics, gold medals, Hall of Fame rings, and egos the size of stadiums, Bob Uecker became an icon by celebrating the fact that he was, by professional standards, completely mediocre. In 2025, we lost Mr. Baseball, but we didn't lose a great athlete, we lost the funniest man to ever wear a uniform. Bob Uecker's playing career is the stuff of comedy legend, mostly because he wrote the jokes himself. He played 6 seasons in the major leagues in the 1960s as a catcher for the Milwaukee Braves, St. Louis Cardinals, and Philadelphia Phillies. His career statistics are hilariously average, a lifetime batting average of .200, 14 home runs, and 74 RBIs. Most players would try to hide those numbers. They would bury them in the footnotes of history. Bob Uecker weaponized them. He realized early on that while he might not be able to hit a curveball, he could tell a story better than anyone in the locker room. He turned his time on the bench into a stand-up comedy routine that charmed the entire nation. He famously joked, "I set records that will never be equaled. In fact, I hope 90 of them don't even get printed." He told stories about how he would look at the manager in the dugout and realize the manager was looking right past him, pretending he didn't exist. He bragged about how he could catch a knuckleball by waiting for it to stop rolling. This self-deprecation was revolutionary. In the 1960s and 70s, athletes were supposed to be gods. They were supposed to be stoic heroes like Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays. Bob Uecker was the anti-hero. He was the guy who represented every kid who loved the game of baseball but just wasn't very good at it. He was the everyman in a jersey. He made us feel like we belonged in the dugout, too. He took the sting out of failure and replaced it with laughter. Here is a psychological question for the sports fans watching: why do we love the underdog/loser archetype so much? Do you prefer the arrogant superstar who wins everything and knows he is the best, or the humble benchwarmer who can laugh at himself? I want to know if you think personality is more important than talent in building a legacy. Let me know your philosophy in the comments. If Bob Uecker had just been a funny former player, he would have been a footnote. But he became a pop culture titan because of 2 things, Johnny Carson and Hollywood. Bob Uecker made over 100 appearances on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Think about that number. He wasn't a movie star promoting a blockbuster, he was a backup catcher telling stories about dropping fly balls. Johnny Carson loved him because Uecker was a natural storyteller with impeccable timing. Those late-night appearances launched him into a stratosphere of fame that Hall of Famers couldn't touch. He became the face of Miller Lite beer in the 1980s, starring in what are widely considered the greatest commercials in sports history. The image of Uecker being dragged out of a stadium by security while shouting, "I must be in the front row," became a catchphrase for an entire decade. But for a specific generation, the generation that grew up renting VHS tapes in the late 80s and 90s, Bob Uecker will always be Harry Doyle. In 1989, Uecker starred in the comedy classic Major League. He played the radio announcer for the Cleveland Indians, a team of misfits and losers. The role was essentially a heightened version of himself. He sat in the booth, pouring whiskey into his coffee, and delivering the most savage, cynical, and hilarious commentary ever committed to film. His lines became part of the American vocabulary. Just a bit outside. Ball 4. Ball 8. Ball 12. One hit. That's all we got, one goddamn hit. He took a fictional role and made it feel more real than reality. He captured the frustration of the die-hard sports fan who loves a terrible team. He wasn't polished, he was drunk on misery and sarcasm, and it was perfect. He proved that the announcer is just as important as the players. He gave a voice to the suffering of the fan base. This triggers a massive wave of nostalgia. If you can hear his voice saying, "Just a bit outside," right now, I need you to hit the like button. Let's see how many Major League fans are watching. Do you quote this movie with your friends? Tell me your favorite Harry Doyle line in the comments. However, beyond the movies and the talk shows, Bob Uecker's true soul resided in Milwaukee. For over 50 years, Bob Uecker was the radio voice of the Milwaukee Brewers. He wasn't playing a character there, he was the soundtrack of summer for millions of people in Wisconsin and across the Midwest. There is an intimacy to baseball radio that doesn't exist in any other sport. The game is slow. It happens every single day for 6 months. The announcer talks to you while you are driving home from work, while you are grilling in the backyard, while you are falling asleep on the porch. Bob Uecker was there for the bad seasons, the good seasons, and everything in between. He was the grandfather who sat next to you and explained the game with wit, wisdom, and a complete lack of pretension. He worked until the very end. Even into his 90s, he was still in the booth, calling home games, his voice raspy with age but his mind still sharp as a tack. He refused to retire because he loved the game too much. He loved the rhythm of it. When he passed away in 2025 at the age of 91, the silence in the ballpark was deafening. It wasn't just the loss of a broadcaster, it was the loss of a constant companion. For many fans, they had never known a world where Bob Uecker wasn't calling balls and strikes. He was the last link to a simpler time in sports, before analytics and billion-dollar contracts took over the headlines. He reminded us that baseball is, at its core, a game. It is supposed to be fun. Bob Uecker proved that you don't need to be a Hall of Fame player to be a Hall of Fame human being. He taught us that life is a lot easier if you don't take yourself too seriously. He showed us that if you can't be the hero hitting the home run, you can be the guy in the booth making millions of people laugh about the strikeout. He was the jester who became the king. Mr. Baseball has signed off. The radio is static. But our next loss takes us from the bright lights of the diamond to the mysterious, secluded basement of Big Pink. Up next, we have a musical wizard. Garth Hudson was the bearded genius behind the band. He was the man who made the organ sound like a religious experience. He was the last surviving member of the original lineup, and his death marks the final note of the greatest Americana band in history. Subscribe now, because number 7 is a tribute to a true virtuoso. Number 7, Garth Hudson. To understand the magnitude of this loss, you have to close your eyes and listen to a specific sound. It isn't a guitar. It isn't a drum. It is a swirling, distorted, church organ from hell sound that opens the song, Chest Fever. That sound is the genetic method, and the man who created it wasn't just a keyboard player, he was a musical alchemist. In January 2025, the music world lost its professor. Garth Hudson was the bearded wizard of the band, the genius who looked like a 19th-century prospector but played like a mad scientist from the future. Garth Hudson was always the outlier. In the 1960s, rock and roll was dominated by self-taught rebels who learned 3 chords and a lot of attitude. Garth was different. He was a classically trained musician from Canada who grew up studying Bach, Mozart, and music theory. When he joined the group that would become the band, alongside Levon Helm, Robbie Robertson, Rick Danko, and Richard Manuel, he was the secret weapon. He was the only one who could read and write music fluently. In fact, his entry into the group is one of the great myths of rock history. His parents, conservative and religious, were terrified that their son was throwing away his education to join a rock and roll band. To appease them, the other members of the group agreed to pay Garth an extra $10 a week to be their music teacher. The idea was that he wasn't just a band member, he was a consultant. For years, he ostensibly gave them lessons, but in reality, he was teaching them something far more valuable: texture. Garth didn't just play notes, he painted with sound. While the rest of the band played earthy, rooted Americana music, Garth hovered above it all with a Lowrey organ, not the standard Hammond B3 that everyone else used, but a Lowrey, which he modified and tortured until it produced sounds that no one had ever heard before. He could make it sound like a carnival, a funeral, a bagpipe, or a spaceship. He was the atmosphere. He was the glue. Here is a question for the musicians and the deep listeners: do you think having formal music theory training makes you a better rock star, or does it kill the raw feel of the music? Garth Hudson proved you could have both. I want to see a debate in the comments, #theory versus #feel. Does knowing the rules help you break them? Garth Hudson's genius was best displayed in the legendary Basement Tapes sessions. In 1967, after Bob Dylan's motorcycle accident, the group retreated to a pink house in Woodstock, New York. In that basement, while the rest of the world was getting psychedelic, they went back to the roots. And Garth was the architect of that sound. He set up the microphones. He ran the tape machine. But more importantly, he provided the sonic landscape that made those songs feel like they were 100 years old. He was a master of the fill. If you listen to The Wait or Up on Cripple Creek, listen to what is happening in the background. That funky, croaking sound on Cripple Creek. That is Garth playing a clavinet through a wah-wah pedal, a combination that Stevie Wonder would later make famous, but Garth did it first. He was constantly tinkering, wiring, and inventing. He was the eccentric uncle of the group, a man who spoke in riddles and wore broad-brimmed hats, existing on a different spiritual plane than his hard-partying bandmates. While Levon, Rick, and Richard were known for their wild lifestyles, Garth was the observer. He was the survivor. He didn't burn out, he endured. But his eccentricity was part of his charm. There are stories of him leaving the house in the middle of winter to record the sound of the wind, or wiring up the plumbing of Big Pink to see if he could record the vibrations of the pipes. He treated the world as an instrument. His solo on Chest Fever is perhaps his defining moment. Live, he would improvise for minutes before the song started, quoting Bach's Toccata and Fugue and turning a rock concert into a cathedral service. It was terrifying and majestic. He forced rock fans to listen to classical virtuosity, and they loved him for it. He proved that a keyboard player could be just as dangerous as a guitar hero. This triggers a sense of mystery. Garth was famously quiet, often letting his hands do the talking. Hit the like button if you appreciate the silent genius. In a band, the one who stands in the back, says nothing, but controls the entire universe of the song. The tragedy of Garth Hudson's passing in January 2025 is the crushing finality of it. For years, Garth was the last man standing. Richard Manuel died in 1986. Rick Danko died in 1999. Levon Helm died in 2012. And finally, Robbie Robertson passed in 2023. For 2 years, Garth Hudson was the sole keeper of the flame. He was the only person left on Earth who knew what it felt like to be in that room when The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down was written. In his final years, Garth was frail, living in a care facility, yet the music never left him. Videos would surface occasionally of him sitting at a piano, his hands trembling, but the moment he touched the keys, the magic returned. The muscle memory of genius does not fade. He remained a beloved figure, a living monument to a time when 5 guys went into the woods and changed the course of music history. With his death, the circle is unbroken, but it is also closed. The band is gone. There is no one left to tell the stories. The Big Pink is just a house now. The basement is silent. Garth Hudson leaves behind a lesson for every creative person: you don't have to be the frontman to be the most important person in the room. You don't need the spotlight to shine. You just need to listen to the spaces between the notes and fill them with something beautiful. He taught us that music is not just about entertainment, it is about architecture. He built cathedrals out of sound, and we were lucky enough to worship in them. The professor has left the building. The organ has faded into the echo. But our next loss takes us from the concert hall to the frozen, unforgiving ice of the Olympic arena. Up next, we have the voice of winter. Dick Button was a 2-time Olympic gold medalist who invented modern figure skating, but you probably know him as the cranky, brilliant commentator who wasn't afraid to tell a skater they were terrible. He was Uncle Dick, the man who demanded perfection and invented the flying camel. Subscribe now, because number 8 is a tribute to the sharpest tongue in sports. Garth Hudson Chest Fever Organ Solo. I chose this video because it showcases the legendary, genetic method, intro to Chest Fever, perfectly illustrating the mad scientist organ style described in the script. Number 8, Dick Button. To truly understand the colossal magnitude of this loss, you have to realize that before Dick Button, figure skating was essentially a polite, ballroom activity performed on frozen water. It was stiff. It was formal. It was restricted by gravity and tradition. Then came Dick Button, a man who treated gravity not as a law, but as a mild suggestion. In January 2025, the world lost the godfather of the ice. We didn't just lose an athlete, we lost the Isaac Newton of figure skating, the man who literally wrote the physics of the sport. Dick Button burst onto the scene in the late 1940s, an era when sports were defined by grit and black and white newsreels. He was a prodigy. He won 2 Olympic gold medals, first in St. Moritz in 1948 and then in Oslo in 1952. But winning wasn't enough for him. He wanted to change the geometry of what was possible. He was the first skater in history to land a double axel in competition. Think about that. Before him, no one had dared to rotate that many times in the air. He was the first to land a triple jump of any kind, a triple loop in 1952. He invented the flying camel spin, a move where the skater jumps into a horizontal spin, looking like a human propeller. Every single time you watch the Winter Olympics today and see a skater launch themselves into a quad or a complex spin combination, you are watching the ghost of Dick Button. He built the foundation that every modern skater stands on. He turned a passive, artistic display into an athletic war. But his impact went beyond just jumping. He brought an intellectual rigor to the sport. He studied ballet. He studied theater. He believed that skating should be a fusion of extreme athleticism and high art. He was a perfectionist who practiced until his blades wore down the ice. He dominated his era so thoroughly that he didn't just beat his competitors, he rendered them obsolete. He was the Babe Ruth, the Michael Jordan, and the Muhammad Ali of figure skating wrapped into one sweater-wearing package. Here is a question for the Olympic watchers and the sports historians: there is an eternal war in figure skating between the jumpers, the athletes, and the dancers, the artists. Do you prefer the athletic side of skating, the big, dangerous jumps and quads? Or do you prefer the artistic side, the edge work, the emotion, and the beauty? Dick Button demanded both. I want to see a debate in the comments, #Team Athletic or #Team Artistic. Which one matters more to you? Garth Hudson's genius was best displayed in the legendary Basement Tapes sessions. In 1967, after Bob Dylan's motorcycle accident, the group retreated to a pink house in Woodstock, New York. In that basement, while the rest of the world was getting psychedelic, they went back to the roots. And Garth was the architect of that sound. He set up the microphones. He ran the tape machine. But more importantly, he provided the sonic landscape that made those songs feel like they were 100 years old. He was a master of the fill. If you listen to The Wait or Up on Cripple Creek, listen to what is happening in the background. That funky, croaking sound on Cripple Creek. That is Garth playing a clavinet through a wah-wah pedal, a combination that Stevie Wonder would later make famous, but Garth did it first. He was constantly tinkering, wiring, and inventing. He was the eccentric uncle of the group, a man who spoke in riddles and wore broad-brimmed hats, existing on a different spiritual plane than his hard-partying bandmates. While Levon, Rick, and Richard were known for their wild lifestyles, Garth was the observer. He was the survivor. He didn't burn out, he endured. But his eccentricity was part of his charm. There are stories of him leaving the house in the middle of winter to record the sound of the wind, or wiring up the plumbing of Big Pink to see if he could record the vibrations of the pipes. He treated the world as an instrument. His solo on Chest Fever is perhaps his defining moment. Live, he would improvise for minutes before the song started, quoting Bach's Toccata and Fugue and turning a rock concert into a cathedral service. It was terrifying and majestic. He forced rock fans to listen to classical virtuosity, and they loved him for it. He proved that a keyboard player could be just as dangerous as a guitar hero. This triggers a sense of mystery. Garth was famously quiet, often letting his hands do the talking. Hit the like button if you appreciate the silent genius. In a band, the one who stands in the back, says nothing, but controls the entire universe of the song. In his later years, Dick Button became an elder statesman, a beloved curmudgeon who would occasionally pop up to remind everyone that things were better in the old days. But even as he aged, his mind remained sharp. He was active on Twitter well into his 90s, live-tweeting skating events with the same biting wit he used in the broadcast booth. He never lost his passion. When Dick Button passed away in January 2025 at the age of 95, it marked the definitive end of the golden age of Olympic broadcasting. We have lost the last link to a time when the Olympics felt like a singular, global event that the entire world watched together. He was the narrator of our winters. He was the voice that guided us through the drama of the ice. His death also signifies the loss of a specific type of expertise. Dick Button didn't just read stats off a screen, he knew the ice. He knew the physics. He knew the history. He embodied the sport in a way that no modern commentator can match. Today, skating is faster, more technical, and more athletic than ever before. But without Dick Button's voice to frame it, it feels a little less colorful. It feels a little less important. He leaves behind a sport that he essentially built from scratch. Every time a skater takes the ice, they are skating on the house that Dick built. He taught us that good enough is not enough. He taught us to reach for the triple, even if we crash. He was the ultimate judge, and his scorecard is finally full. The judge has put down his pencil. The booth is empty. But our next loss takes us from the clean, white ice of the Olympics to the smoky, dangerous, drug-fueled clubs of 1960s London. Up next, we have the Muse. Marianne Faithfull was the face of the swinging 60s, the girlfriend of Mick Jagger, and the woman who co-wrote Sister Morphine. She survived scandals, homelessness, and addiction to become a rock and roll matriarch. But in 2025, the music finally stopped. Subscribe now, because number 9 is a tribute to the ultimate survivor. Number 9, Marianne Faithfull. To truly understand the tragedy and the eventual triumph of Marianne Faithfull, you have to look beyond the photographs. You have to deconstruct one of the most romanticized and destructive concepts in the history of art, the muse. In the 1960s, Marianne Faithfull was the ultimate it girl. She was the blonde angel with the shy smile who sang As Tears Go By. She was the girlfriend of Mick Jagger. She was the face of swinging London. But being a muse is a dangerous job. It means you are celebrated for your beauty, but you are ignored for your talent. It means you are seen as an object that inspires art, rather than a human being who creates it. Marianne Faithfull was born into aristocracy, Her mother was a baroness, but she became the queen of the counterculture. When she was discovered at a party by the Rolling Stones manager Andrew Loog Oldham, she was just 17 years old. They didn't ask her if she could write, they asked her if she could sing. They molded her into a fragile, innocent pop star. She was the anti-Janis Joplin. She was polite, she was pretty, and she was quiet. But behind the scenes, Marianne was intellectually ferocious. She was reading Baudelaire and Rimbaud while the rock stars around her were just trying to act like rebels. She was the one who introduced Mick Jagger to the Russian classic The Master and Margarita, a book that directly inspired the Rolling Stones' masterpiece, Sympathy for the Devil. Think about that. Without Marianne Faithfull, one of the greatest rock songs in history might not exist. Yet, for decades, she was treated as nothing more than a pretty accessory on Mick Jagger's arm. She was a prop in their wild stories, a footnote in their biographies. The press was relentless. They slut-shamed her while celebrating the men for the exact same behavior. The most infamous example was the drug raid at Keith Richards' house in 1967. When the police burst in, Marianne was wearing only a fur rug. The media destroyed her. They painted her as a symbol of moral decay. Meanwhile, the male rock stars were painted as dangerous, cool outlaws. The double standard was nauseating. She realized too late that in the boys' club of rock and roll, the woman is always the collateral damage. Here is a question for the rock historians and the feminists watching this: do you think the concept of the muse is romantic, or is it inherently sexist? Does calling a woman a muse strip her of her own agency and credit? I want to see a fierce debate in the comments. Type #muse or #artist. Was she the inspiration, or was she the architect? If the 1960s were the party, the 1970s were the hangover. And for Marianne Faithfull, the hangover was almost fatal. When her relationship with Mick Jagger ended in 1970, she didn't just fade away, she crashed. She lost custody of her son. She attempted suicide. And then, she disappeared into the London fog. For 2 years, the woman who had once been royalty in the music business was homeless. She lived on a wall in Soho. Not in an apartment near a wall, she lived on a wall. She was battling a severe heroin addiction that consumed everything she had. She was anorexic, sick, and forgotten. The tabloids, which had once obsessed over her beauty, now ran cruel stories about her downfall. They wrote her obituary while she was still alive. They dismissed her as another casualty of the era, another pretty face destroyed by the excesses of rock and roll. But during this descent into hell, something physically changed in her. The drugs, the cigarettes, and the harsh London winters destroyed her voice. The pure, angelic soprano that had sung, "As Tears Go By," was gone forever. In its place, something else emerged. Her voice dropped an octave. It cracked. It became raspy, deep, and whiskey-soaked. It became a voice that sounded like it had been dragged over broken glass. Most singers would have seen this as a career-ending tragedy. Marianne Faithfull eventually realized it was a weapon. She no longer sounded like an innocent girl, she sounded like a witch, a survivor, a woman who had seen the devil and lived to tell the tale. This transformation is one of the most dramatic in music history. It wasn't just a vocal change, it was a psychological shift. The angel was dead. The artist was waking up. This triggers a dark psychological question about creativity and pain. Do you believe that an artist needs to suffer to create true masterpieces? Would Marianne Faithfull have become a legend if she had stayed safe and comfortable, or did she need to break to become whole? Hit the like button if you think her broken voice was infinitely more powerful than her pretty voice. In 1979, Marianne Faithfull did the impossible. She didn't just come back, she kicked the door down. She released the album Broken English, and it was a revelation. It was a fusion of punk, reggae, and electronic music that sounded like nothing else on the radio. But it was the lyrics, and the voice, that stunned the world. The title track was about terrorism. The Ballad of Lucy Jordan was a heartbreaking anthem about a housewife losing her mind in suburbia. And then there was Why Die Do It, a song so vulgar, so angry, and so raw that it terrified the record label. It was a woman screaming about betrayal with a ferocity that made the punk rockers look like choir boys. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was demanding respect. But her greatest battle was yet to come. It was the battle for her name. For years, the Rolling Stones song, Sister Morphine, a haunting track about addiction, was credited to Jagger and Richards. But everyone knew the truth. Marianne wrote the lyrics. It was her pain, her experience, and her words. She had to fight a legal battle to finally get her name on the credits. It wasn't about the money, it was about the truth. She refused to let history erase her contribution. When Marianne Faithfull passed away in 2025 at the age of 78, it was a victory lap. She had outlived almost everyone who predicted her death. She survived heroin. She survived breast cancer. She survived a near-fatal battle with COVID-19 in 2020 that left her hospitalized for weeks. She was the ultimate survivor. She proved that she was never just a footnote in Mick Jagger's biography. She was a titan in her own right. In her final years, she continued to record, collaborating with Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, creating music that was haunting and beautiful. She embraced her age. She didn't try to look like the 17-year-old girl on the fur rug. She wore her wrinkles and her rasp like battle scars. Her death marks the end of a specific archetype, the British rock aristocrat who lived through the fire and came out the other side. She leaves behind a legacy of brutal honesty. She taught us that you can be broken, you can be lost, and you can be silenced, but you never have to stay that way. Survival is the ultimate revenge. The angel with the broken wing has finally flown away. The wall in Soho is empty. But our final loss takes us from the gritty streets of London to the velvet soul of America. We are ending with the most elegant voice in history. Up next, we have the voice of pure emotion. Roberta Flack didn't just sing songs, she stopped time. She gave us Killing Me Softly and The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. In 2025, the music world lost its most elegant songbird. Subscribe now, because number 10 is a tribute to the woman who killed us softly with her song. Number 10, Roberta Flack. To understand why this is the hardest goodbye of 2025, and arguably the most significant loss to the world of pure artistry, we have to understand the power of silence. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the musical landscape was defined by noise. It was the era of psychedelic rock, the screaming guitars of Jimi Hendrix, the shouting funk of James Brown, and the rising, thumping beat of disco. The world was loud. The culture was screaming. And then, into this cacophony, walked a woman who dared to whisper. In February 2025, the world lost Roberta Flack, the woman who taught us that the quietest voice in the room is often the most powerful. Unlike the other stars of her era, Roberta Flack did not fight for attention. She demanded it through sheer, unadulterated elegance. She was a classically trained pianist, a prodigy who entered Howard University at the age of 15 on a full music scholarship. She wasn't a pop star in the traditional sense, she was an academic. She was a teacher. Before she was famous, she taught music in junior high schools, teaching teenagers how to appreciate the structure of a melody. That academic discipline defined her career. When she sat at the piano, she treated a pop song with the same reverence and structural integrity as a Beethoven sonata. She slowed the world down. Her breakout moment is a testament to the power of patience. In 1969, she released her debut album, First Take. Buried on that album was a song titled The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. It was a slow, haunting ballad. At the time, it did nothing. It was too slow for radio. It was ignored. But 3 years later, Clint Eastwood, yes, Dirty Harry himself, heard the song on his car radio while driving down a highway. He was so mesmerized by the ethereal quality of her voice that he pulled over to find out who it was. He insisted on using the song in his directorial debut, Play Misty for Me. Suddenly, in 1972, a 3-year-old song about eternal love became the #1 song in America. It stayed there for 6 weeks. It won the Grammy for Record of the Year. Roberta Flack proved that you don't need a catchy hook or a fast beat to captivate the world, you just need the truth. She held notes so long, and with such tender control, that it felt like she was stopping the rotation of the earth. She created an intimacy that didn't exist in pop music. When you listened to her, you didn't feel like she was performing for a stadium, you felt like she was sitting on the edge of your bed, singing directly to your soul. Here is a philosophical question for the true music lovers watching this: do you think modern music has lost the art of being slow? In a world of 15-second TikTok clips and songs designed for short attention spans, do we still have the cultural patience for a song like, The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face? I want to know if you think technology has killed the ballad. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Roberta Flack was often described as the Velvet Hammer. Her voice was soft, velvet, but her perfectionism was absolute, the hammer. She was not a passive singer, she was a producer, an arranger, and a visionary who knew exactly what she wanted. There is no better example of this than her masterpiece, Killing Me Softly with his song. The story of this song is legendary. Roberta was on a plane, listening to the in-flight audio program, when she heard a folk singer named Lori Lieberman singing an early version of the song. Roberta was struck by the lyrics, but she heard a different arrangement in her head. When she landed, she went into the studio and spent months, literally months, perfecting the rhythm. She changed the beat from a folk strum to a heartbeat. She added the layered background vocals that hum like a choir of angels. When she released it in 1973, it didn't just become a hit, it became a standard. It won her the Grammy for Record of the Year again. This made her the first artist in history to win the top Grammy in consecutive years, a record that stood untouched for decades until U2 and Billie Eilish eventually repeated it. But Roberta did it first. She proved that excellence is not a fluke. But you cannot tell the story of Roberta Flack without telling the story of her other half, Donny Hathaway. Their partnership is arguably the greatest male-female duet in the history of soul music. They were not lovers, but they were musical soulmates. They understood each other on a molecular level. When they sang, Where is the Love, or The Closer I Get to You, it was a conversation between two geniuses. Their voices wrapped around each other like smoke. But there was a tragedy lurking beneath the harmony. Donny Hathaway suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia. He was a tortured genius who heard voices and battled demons that no melody could silence. Roberta was his anchor. She tried to protect him. She tried to save him. But in 1979, the darkness won. Donny Hathaway fell to his death from a hotel window in New York City. He was only 33 years old. The death of Donny Hathaway broke something in Roberta Flack. She lost her musical mirror. For the next 46 years, every time she sang their songs, she was singing a duet with a ghost. She carried his legacy on her shoulders, keeping his name alive, reminding the world of his genius. She became the keeper of the flame, singing for both of them. This triggers a deep fascination with the musical soulmate. Think about the great duos, Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell, Ike and Tina, Roberta and Donny. Why is it that the most beautiful music often comes from the most tragic partnerships? Do you think she ever truly recovered from losing him? Hit the like button if you think Where is the Love is the perfect duet. The tragedy of Roberta Flack's final years was a cruel irony that feels almost like a punishment from the gods of music. For a woman whose entire existence was defined by her voice, a voice that could express the deepest nuances of the human heart, her final battle was one of enforced silence. In 2022, Roberta Flack's team announced that she had been diagnosed with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It is a brutal, degenerative condition that attacks the nerve cells controlling voluntary muscles. Slowly, methodically, the disease robbed her of her ability to move, to speak, and most devastatingly, to sing. Imagine the horror of that. The woman who gave us, Killing Me Softly, the woman whose voice was her instrument, her weapon, and her identity, was trapped inside a body that would no longer obey her. It was a prison. Yet, reports from her inner circle described a woman who faced this nightmare with the same grace she brought to the stage. She didn't hide. She allowed the announcement to be made public, raising awareness for a disease that has no cure. She communicated with her eyes, with her smile, and with the presence that never left her. When she passed away on February 24, 2025, at the age of 88, it was not a tragedy, it was a release. The velvet cage was finally open. The voice that had been trapped for 3 years was finally free to join the choir. Roberta Flack leaves behind a legacy that is fundamentally different from the other artists on this list. She didn't invent a genre like Peter Yarrow. She didn't invent a sport like Dick Button. She invented a mood. She taught us that it is okay to be sensitive. She taught us that vulnerability is a strength. She provided the soundtrack for millions of first kisses, first dances, and quiet moments of reflection. Her death is the final reunion. Somewhere, on a stage we cannot see, the intro to The Closer I Get to You is playing. Donny Hathaway is standing at the microphone. And finally, after 46 years of waiting, Roberta Flack is walking out to join him. The duet is complete. And that is our list of the stars we lost in 2025. From the grit of Gene Hackman to the grace of Roberta Flack, this year took away the architects of our culture. Who on this list will you miss the most? Is there a legend we lost this year that we missed? I want to see your tributes and your memories in the comments section right now. Tell me which song, which movie, or which moment defined your life. These icons may be gone, but as long as we watch their movies, play their records, and tell their stories, they never truly die. They are just on a different frequency. I am your host, and this has been a tribute to the greats. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.